Today on the show, I have the pleasure of chatting with John Van Der Giessen. John grew up in rural Idaho, but surprisingly enough, he discovered the world of rugby union at the age of 19. He bought a one-way ticket to Australia in 2003, and he played at the University of Queensland, which in fact is the university that I went to. So go the Red Heavies and anyone who's listening from UQ. And then in 2003, he watched the Rugby World Cup, and through some kindness and a lot of hard work and saying yes to a ton of opportunities, John went on to travel the world whilst playing professional rugby in the English Premier League, the top 14 league, and represented the US national team at 2 Rugby World Cups. Just to let you all know, if you don't know I'm a rugby fan, I think you should do by now after listening to this show for 7 years, but I'm a massive rugby nut. I also played for the Red Heavies, not as good as John, but it's awesome to have him here on the show. Today, John is now focused full-time on real estate investing. He is a partner at REM Capital. It's a growing real estate investment firm with over 4,000 units through 7 states here in the US, and they're vertically integrated with property management in-house. G'day, John. Welcome to the show. How you doing today, mate?
Reed, couldn't be happier, and this has been a long time coming. We've been chatting for a while, and I'm excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, I know. Mate, not only am I a fanboy of you, just the fact that you've been to a Rugby World Cup and ex-professional rugby player, being a huge rugby nut myself, and I still watch all the highlights of Premiership. Even though I don't follow the Premiership, but I still watch the highlights of, top 14, the Super Rugby,
yeah.
And I'm, if you go on my YouTube channel, it's surfing and rugby. That's what those little bots online are just, hey, Reed, have you seen this surfing video? Have you seen this rugby video? So I'm a huge rugby nut, man. It's awesome to have someone on the show that's an ex-professional rugby player. I actually interviewed the gentleman, and I'm going to stuff up his name, but he was the founder of the Austin Elites. His brother was the Austin Elite. David, the head of Keller Williams, and David Osborne, and head of Go Abundance. His brother used to be the founder of Austin Elite, which was that first professional rugby team, iteration. I know Austin's had a few iterations now, but mate, I want to get into it. Rewind the clock and tell me how you made your first ever dollar as a kid.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, rural Idaho. My family from the Netherlands kind of came over to Illinois and had a bunch of farm ground over there. And then my dad decided to head over to Idaho and start something out there in agriculture in the 70s. And so my first dollar as a kid, I made $20 picking rocks out of a potato field, which is going to be funny for some American listeners because that's what they associate Idaho with, is great potatoes. So, I worked the entire weekend picking up rocks and loading them into a front loader to get off the field before planting. And looking back, that was slave labor, Reed, but man, it was awesome. That first 20 felt really good, even though I think you got a good deal out of me.
No, I remember doing something similar back in the day, like there's sort of those hard labor jobs there in Australia, the cotton farms. You got to get rid of weeds and you chip the weeds out, and for prep of cotton farms, and it's just backbreaking work. 8-9 hours in the sun. And it's you go to university for a reason. You realize that physical labor is not wasn't for me, but it's a good lesson to learn how to graft for a dollar to make sure that you understand the value of a dollar.
100%. I agree with you, Reed. What I like to think of is that kind of taught me work ethic and persistence and consistency. But then it also taught me you can look at things in a couple of ways. You can look at things as, carrying buckets every day, day in, day out, or you can look at it as, how am I going to be building pipelines? And that really transferred for me in business.
No, well, I want to transfer a little bit before we get into the business to the rugby. So walk the listeners through the backstory there of discovering rugby, because in the intro I said, a kid from Idaho, rugby probably, you don't think of Idaho on the map of rugby in the world and think that's where the international players are going to come from. But how did you get into it?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And it's a funny story because I had a really late growth spurt, Reed. And I'm actually really thankful, even though, it's tough when your friends in high school are grown men and you're still a child. But I'm thankful that took place, because I think that if I would have grown when everybody else did, that I probably would have went on to kind of a typical, playing collegiate sports, so sort of a scenario, maybe football, basketball, something like that. And then, got done and found a job and along my merry way. Right. But because I was such a small kid, I mean, my first driver's license said 5'7", 125 pounds. So, I showed up to college and I was just kind of getting into my own and starting to put on a little size. And I was like, man, I really want to play something. And a friend of mine from Alaska, shout out to Brian, he said, well, Bud, you should come and play rugby. And I said, what's that? I'd never heard of the word. And so then I showed up for the Tuesday, Thursday training, played on the weekend, and it was a tournament. So I actually had multiple games and did everything wrong, Reed, and then absolutely loved it. And then went back to the computer lab back when they had computer labs and did some research and found out next year, heads up, there was a Rugby World Cup. It was every 4 years, huge sporting event. And I said, I need to be a part of that. So bought that one-way ticket to Oz via Sydney, which, funny enough, on the map, Sydney's only like 2 inches away from Brisbane. But man, that's a big space that I had to figure out how to get up to, hitchhiking and whatever else. So massive learning experience and really an appreciation about just the world in general and more appreciation for where I came from too. So really cool experience. And then after that, it was just a series of people, kindly opening doors that didn't have to, which has been in business for me as well, funny enough. And I try to do the same with people, opening up doors for them when I really don't have to, and giving that person that puts their hand up an opportunity. And that literally just snowballed into another club in another country, and then finally getting on the USA radar, and then getting an agent and starting to get a couple of contracts and some World Cup looks. So it was a wild 10 years, man. That's awesome. And 10 years of professionalism. Like that's a long time to be in a professional sport. Given the fact, you'd be coming into a sport, it's like me trying to pick up, or Aussies trying to pick up NFL, when you don't have those micro skills of playing backyard footy with your brother or your sisters and your mates, the offloads and the nuances of it. It would have been a real steep learning curve to come in, particularly, sounds like you were in your late teens anyway, to pick it up from scratch. So clearly you would have had just a natural athletic ability that attracted someone to say, hey, this guy's got something here. Let's nurture him into being a professional athlete. Yeah. And you know what, Reed, I think just to relate to the folks that maybe aren't sports people, there was always somebody out there that was bigger, faster, stronger, and had a higher rugby IQ than me. Mm-hmm. And I still find that in business today, Reed. And it doesn't matter when you have the mindset that you're going to outwork somebody. Mm. And that's really what I attribute a lot of my success to. I was willing to say yes and keep going when other people that were, more gifted than me, didn't want to. They didn't want it. Right. That's incredible. Talk to me. Which World Cups did you go to? So first one was 2007. I was the young buck in the locks, which is the position that I play. And that was in France, right? That was in France. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And some huge hitters, four guys ahead of me. And Peter Thorburn, the old Kiwi All Blacks selector, who was our coach at the time. He said, John, you're not going to be going, but you've really shown well. And we're really excited to keep developing you. And just stay ready too. And Reed, I had a weird inclination that I might get a crack if somebody got hurt. And sure enough, I think, just a handful of days into the Rugby World Cup, one of the locks, one of the starting locks, Luke Gross, great human being, came up with a pretty big injury. And so I got a call at 2:00 in the morning. And they said, John, you're coming to the World Cup. Wow. So I got to watch, people that I had a high degree of respect for in the game really kind of perform. And that just lit a fire with me for the next 4 years about, okay, what do I need to do to be that guy running out of the tunnel? Mm. And at that stage, were you professional? No, but because, taking those chances and doing those things, that then put me in, a direct pipeline to be professional, got the agent, got the opportunity to step into the French top 14 league.
What was the first game? What did you run out to?
With the U.S. team?
Yeah.
Oh man. That's a really...
Was it at the World Cup? Because that would have been pretty magical. It wasn't. Okay, interesting.
No, I did not suit up for the World Cup. Injury, reserve, and then they just brought in and kind of mixed and matched because Peter was big on experience, and he said, I want you here, I want you observing, I want you learning, and you may get a look, but probably not. And I didn't. But I'm glad I didn't, because I had to go back for 4 years and earn the next time I ran out onto the field for a World Cup.
Right, which was 2011, right? So this is New Zealand.
In New Zealand, yeah.
Yeah, wow. So what was that first game like running out at the World Cup? That would have been an incredible experience, pulling on the US jersey for the Eagles. And who was it against? Can you remember it?
Yeah, so we actually had Ireland September 11th.
Oh, wow.
We had the New York Fire Department and Police Department cut a video for us. And we watched that ahead of running out onto the field and played a very tight game with Ireland and ended up losing. But that was a big moment. And then we had, the way that they structured the World Cup with the pool games at that point in time, we had a 4-day turnaround to playing Russia. And then ended up beating them, besting them. And, there was people in the fans with, cosmonaut outfits on and all sorts of things. And rugby is just fun like that too, right? So, it's anytime you get to represent your country, it's fantastic.
Oh, mate, I could only imagine. And that would have been a pretty, Ireland would have been a big step up. But, on September 11th, they would have pretty, pumped you up, and 4-day turnaround on a full contact sport, in that. But you're probably in so much adrenaline at that point. You're like, injuries don't even matter. They're just sort of, you sort of walk that off, get in the ice bath and next on. But that first win would have been pretty sweet against Russia at a World Cup, because that wouldn't have been that wouldn't have been the USA's first win, right? Ever? It wouldn't have been.
No, they've had other wins previous, but to your point about the celebration, you get on the bus after, and leave the stadium, and, we had, 20,000 odd people, cheering. And I can specifically remember Fireworks by Katy Perry absolutely being screamed at the top of the U.S. guys' lungs, and it was a good ride home for sure. But then you have a small win, you got a small window to celebrate, and you're back on the job too.
Yeah. No, that's incredible, mate. Any stories from that bus ride home? Sort of, naked up and down the young buck, anything that sort of stuff. Any PG versions?
Yeah, no, the stories, man. But some of them are true, some of them aren't. And I got to run it by my boys before I let it in.
As they say, what happens on tour stays on tour.
That's right. That's
awesome, mate. Well, look, I could talk to you as a huge rugby nut. I actually listened to the rugby pod with Big Jim and Andy Good. You should definitely listen to it. Big shout out to those boys. But yeah, look, we could keep talking to you all day about that. But let's get into what you built with REM and that transition, because I know a little bit about your backstory, but tell us how you got involved in multifamily, because coming out of sport, and maybe just touch a little bit on coming out of professionalism, because that is also a hard thing to do mentally, getting back into the workforce after being a professional athlete for 10 years.
Huge. And you know what? We're going to a few different wormholes on this podcast, but I will take a moment to say, anytime that you have a big identity into something, that you are this or you are that. I was the rugby player, and it was cool because I was on TV every weekend in Europe, and people would ask me for autographs and all these kind of crazy things that I never got really comfortable with. But I turned off the lights on that and walked away, pretty satisfied, but I underestimated how hard it would be to transition. And it can get really dark really quick because you're not in the limelight anymore. The friends of convenience don't show up as much, and you kind of really find out a lot about you and a lot about, who your friends are. And it was a big redefining moment in my life. And, one thing you got to do is you got to keep the body moving, man. You
Right.
got to show up and you got to do something every day, because you kind of get into this funk where the adrenaline was pumping all the time. You knew what you were going to do every day. Your days were pretty much set out and scheduled, and then you retire and you don't know where you're going to go and what you're going to do. So yeah, it was a big period for me, no doubt. And so I looked around and got into an entrepreneurial situation very quickly with a startup company in agriculture. And that was a wonderful, wonderful crash course MBA read for 5 years. And at the time that kind of finished, I needed to get more control over my life. And real estate's been around me since I've been a kid in one fashion or another. And so I said, you know what, I think I'm going to go down this real estate path, and went into residential. And, lightning strikes and people open up doors when they don't have to, like I said. And I rode an elevator with the founder of one of Keller Williams' top teams, Lacey Bishop Real Estate. They do about 300 million in volume per year just out of Boise, Idaho. And that spurred about 6 meetings. And then after that, it was just glaringly obvious that we needed to be working together. So I came on that team and really kind of helped transform that organization to a bit of what it is today. And it's a pretty exciting organization with, 50 odd team members, and, they're doing massive stuff in the residential space. So that was a lot of fun. But yeah. I will say, Reed, and, I know I have friends that are still in residential today, and they're incredibly successful. I always felt like there was something else out there in real estate, and I always liked the notion of having cash flow. I didn't like being as good as my next sale and always kind of chasing that in residential. And it just wasn't going to be for me. I wanted something that was very scalable. And I also wanted to be more of an integral part on the leadership level too of an organization, because I believe that I have some things that I can help people with, as far as skill sets. So anyway, ended up kind of listening to some podcasts and talking to the right people, and then all of a sudden, I'm an unlimited partner in some multifamily, which. It's funny when you put I will say this to limited partner people listening, when you put an investment out there and it's $50K, it's $100K, you're like, oh man, this doesn't seem like it's going to go anywhere. It's so slow. I can tell you that almost 4 years, 3.5 years when that was invested, that went by so fast. And then all of a sudden you get that check in the mail where you've doubled your money, and cashed out really nicely. Man, it's a lot like farming in my upbringing. You got to plant those seeds for them to reap the harvest, and it just takes consistency to do so.
No, okay. So much to unpack there, and I want to unpack, but just before we do, back to your mindset of coming out of professional rugby. Being a huge rugby nut myself, and you probably you would have heard about this, but Dan Vickerman took his own life. And you may have played against him, you may have known him, but he's a second row, same position as yourself, and a lot of guys, not only just in rugby but across multiple professional sports, guys and girls, struggle with coming out of professionalism, and it is a massive thing, and people you don't underestimate. I want to just not let that go, because I could only imagine, and I'm nowhere near having touched professionalism, but I've just seen it take people's lives, and it can be you've got to be in the right headspace to come out of a sport, doing it, as you said, grinding day in, very scheduled day in, day out, and keep the body moving. And then, having your identity taken away from you, right? To then redetermine what your identity is. And I think that's, kudos to you to be able to do that, but it's not, I'm just sort of saying it for those listeners, it's not like it's an easy thing to do. And there has been tragedy around that, particularly in the rugby scene.
Yeah, I think as a sport fan, you're like, oh, what do you mean? You had a wonderful career in sport. Like how hard could it be to transition? But it is a massive, massive transition, and it can be very challenging. And I've seen a lot of relationships wrecked. I've seen a lot of things happen that are tough. And you know what? You don't have to go that alone. I would say in retrospect, make sure that you have a good support system and you're staying active. You're, meeting people for coffee and you're talking about, hey, what could I do? Even before you retire. And that could be, there's a transition there with business in general. Like if you're thinking about making a change, while you have your current gig, make sure that you're planting seeds ahead of time so that you can just step off of that boat onto another boat and you don't have to make such a huge gap out of it.
Right. Talk to me about the residential jump. You mentioned Keller Williams, and I think there is an element, and you know this being in the syndication space, but you sort of touched on it, and I know I struggle with this a little bit as well, and it's the constantly trying to outdo or get the next deal, right? Because there's cash flow as an LP investment, right? And there's living off that cash flow and investing in deals. But then there's the art of actually and the business of syndication, and it is not dissimilar to residential real estate in that you have to keep the deals coming through to keep people, your investors satisfied, and it's to try and build a sustainable business around where's the next deal coming from. And it is deal junkie, but how does that sustain over 20, 30 years? That is the underlying power of what a business means. There's still an element of that, and I just wanted to just dive into that just briefly because it not multi and commercial real estate isn't it's not it doesn't. It still has the same problems, in that you've got to go and continue to do the next deal and the next deal and the next deal to build the portfolio, to build the momentum. Otherwise, if you don't, investors could go off and invest somewhere else.
100%. Yeah. I think that you've got to keep bringing value to your investors, and they're only going to wait for so long before they start getting into something else. But on the other side of the coin, Reed, I think that really kind of savvy investors that have a lot of trust in you, they're going to appreciate that, maybe for a quarter or two, your kind of pencils down. And when you're educating them about why and making them a better limited partner investor, they're going to appreciate that.
Right.
They are. And there's always a deal in any market too.
There's always a deal in any market.
You gotta be hunting. You gotta unearth it. You gotta, it's always the, 100 deals to find one, maybe it's 250. Right. It depends. It depends.
Coming in the green room before we press record, we talked about you've grown really quickly, 4,000 units today. You've vertically integrated. How's that growing pain been growing so quickly? Because I have observed companies that I've been intimately involved with grow really quickly, and it can have its growing pains. Right? It looks great on the outside of saying 4,000 units in 3 or 4 years, but that comes with a lot of learnings and probably some few skins on the knees, right? So, what is some of the things that you're taking away as you're now building in 2023 around the team and what you want to focus on?
Sure. I think from an internal perspective, with teammates, it's really about how do we build a winning culture where people want to show up. They want to show up for the person on the left and the right of them. And they won't, how do we empower our teammates? How do we make them feel valued? How do we create systems and structure so that there's really effective and efficient communication? And we condense time on projects and turnarounds, because, if we're doing a renovations project and it's got to be bumped over to accounting to figure out, or we need to involve the lender for a disbursement, all of those sorts of things. How can we really make that efficient and effective? And also, quite frankly, just like sport, there's a bit of accountability in that too. How can you coach up and lead people? And I mentioned, before we push play, it's really about, in this market especially, it's hard to find talent, but how do you attract talent? And then once you attract the talent, how do you keep the talent? And then, dovetailing off of keeping the talent, how do you ascend the talent? Because really an organization from a leadership perspective, you've got to be finding ways to help people get the best out of themselves. Right. So I'm not a big motivator guy. I'm not like, the motivation's got to be within you. But from a leadership perspective, if you can help teammates, find ways to problem solve and kind of remove their own hurdles that are in front of them, then, get out of the way themselves is the comment, right? Like, how do you help people get out of the way of themselves and make a better business with people? And I'm pretty excited about that portion of things right now, to be fair. And, we have a massive development pipeline too. We've got, for us, 250 million in development in our pipeline. And that's been something we've been working on for a long time. So to be fair, on the value add side of things, being a little bit conservative right now and maybe pausing is actually really well timed, because that's going to allow us to work internally, but also focus in on that development opportunity too.
That's awesome. For those people listening, you your team is remote, right?
Yeah.
The nucleus of the team is remote. So how do you build the culture? And this is more of a question post-COVID. A lot of people are remote. My team, at RSN, my business partner's in New York. I'm in LA. Got my head of acquisitions in Central Texas. I've got head of asset management in Phoenix. I've got my investor relations in Mexico City. And I'm building constantly like you. I'm not probably at the scale of you've got it yet, but I'm also at a point where, you have to build that culture right in the beginning and lay those foundations for, the keeping and the sending and the attracting of good talent. But how are you doing that as on a remote basis and keeping the people sort of rowing in the same direction?
Sure. Well, I will say that anytime that we have an opportunity to get together, whether that's as a leadership, we have an annual leadership conference. Those are nice, but that's 2-3 days out of the year, Reed. Like that's not really how you're going to build true culture. And I'm going to preface this by saying we haven't gotten it right all the time. We've had a few missteps and we've done some things wrong with personnel, and that's been a challenge. But what you can do, and I know that there's business owners, people that are in business listening to this, even if your culture is not right now, that doesn't mean that you can't start steering that ship in a different direction. So I think that when you start effective and efficient communication with people, it's starting out with, having those one-on-ones with people and saying, hey, look, I'm going to recognize that maybe you haven't had the support that you need. But you're super valued with what you've been doing, and how can I help you? And start asking some super powerful questions about getting them the tools and resources that they need. So that they feel like, hey man, I'm in a good place. I've got good leadership. I can focus on my job. They've got my back. They're giving me what I need to be effective. And, it's daily incremental things, and it's not big, long drawn out meetings either. I mean, you can have a 5-minute talk every day and keeping people focused and accountable and collaborating on things, and, bringing different team members, divisions within your team together, making sure everybody gets that connection. And sometimes it doesn't even have to be about the job, right? Because there is that element of the water cooler that you're never going to get when you don't have that brick and mortar. And so you have to create that, and just calling people up, making sure that, hey man, what's going on? What are you doing for the weekend? There's that acronym FORD, right? And family, occupation, and recreation and dreams. You just hit on those with people, and it's fun to just see what comes out. It can be a good conversation, Reed. And that's how we got connected.
Right. Well, look, I know a lot of people coming out of building organizations are scared that they don't see the person. They can't go and look over that analyst's shoulder, and they're not sitting in the same room. And I think it comes a little bit different mindset of how, as a leader, you approach that, because with freedom comes a lot more responsibility. And I think the communication, as you're saying, you are remote. Okay, so how do we do this effectively? You have your meetups every year and whatnot, but how do you also make sure that people are feeling seen and heard? And there's a little bit of, responsibility on the individual shoulders who are below you to take on that, to take the baton and say, yeah, I'm going to take this and give back and give my all to the team, because I'm not in an office. I'm not in a cubicle. I'm not being overseen by John every single day to make sure I'm doing my work. So there's always that two different mindsets of what's best for the organization. I assume that as you said, you mentioned you made some mistakes. I assume you're still wanting to continue to be remote. Is there ever a point where you'd come to bring the office back in, or is it always going to be that remote scenario and continuing to manage and evolve to the new way in which we work these days?
Sure. No, we have no intention of shifting from remote, because we've got 3 divisions, Texas, the Midwest, and the Southeast. Robert, our managing partner, he's down in Sarasota, Florida, which is very strategic for me. I've already been down there once during the wintertime, and I'll go down there again. No, it really is about really effective and clear communication and expectations, and making sure that people are prepared when it's meeting time. Bring your numbers, because numbers are important in the business, right? And then, you can say, well, I don't like the fact that I can't look over their shoulder. Well, there are different ways to make sure that accountability and quality of workmanship, if you will, is still being met. And if you can combine somebody that feels respected, they feel heard, they feel valued, they're excited to show up, they're engaged. I think engagement is probably one of the biggest downfalls, or lack of engagement is one of the biggest downfalls in any industry. Somebody just doesn't really care. They're just sort of coasting. When you can get somebody engaged and remote, quality of life is probably fantastic. And, job satisfaction's up there too. So they're probably doing a really good job for you. So, there's a few different factors there.
That's exactly right. Well, I could keep talking to you forever, but last thing before we get into the lightning round, what's the plan for 2023 and beyond?
Sure. Yeah. We always say we're looking to do good deals with good people. And, that's pretty simple, but there's a lot there. So when we can find the right deals, we're going to do those deals, and it's going to have to be with the right people, or we just don't do it. So, with that, we're really not earmarking a specific door count, because it's got to meet that first thing I talked about. If we say we're going to do 5,000 doors, then what? I didn't hear anything about quality in there, but the right deal and the right people, that makes a lot of sense for growth. And then after that, when you execute, good things are going to happen. So for us, it's going to be being conservative, really watching the market as there's price discovery, and really focusing in on our internal systems and structure and culture, as well as capitalizing on this awesome development pipeline that we have. So
whereabouts is that development pipeline? Where are you building?
So we've got a couple of different projects in San Antonio. We're a big fan of that market. I think it's a great value market, and the data coming out of there for jobs and people is fantastic. And we also have 220 units in St. Pete that we're going to be rolling out pretty quickly. St. Pete, Florida, if you don't know, Tampa area, you're, from the site, less than 20 minutes from the #1 beach, TripAdvisor voted in America, and #5 in the world, St. Pete Beach. So, there's a lot to talk about there, and Florida speaks for itself right now. So we're looking at that. And we also have a couple other, further out in 2023 deals in Texas that we're going to be starting to develop as well.
Nice, man. Yeah. Well, it's all great markets. I'm very familiar with San Antonio. It's where I cut my teeth. So, everyone seems to be attracted to that market right now. So I wish you all the best. With that being said, we'd like to dive into the top 5 investing tips. You ready to get into it?
Let's get it.
Mate, number 1 is, what's the daily habit you practice to keep on track towards your goals?
Daily habit that I practice to keep on top of my goals, making sure that the night before I'm set up and I've visualized what I need to be doing.
Gotcha. Love it.
Because if you show up to your desk at 8 a.m. or whatever you're doing, and you're like, okay, what do I do now? You're behind the ball. Like you aren't thinking about what needs to be executed. So you got to think about that the night before.
I love it. Being prepared. And it sort of probably helps you. I know with me, I do a Sunday evening type of thing. Like I get the Sunday scaries, but if I write it down for them a week, then I'm like, I know where it is. I don't have to keep thinking about it because it's in the book or it's been written down somewhere. So being planning ahead helps with the management of your mind going at 1,000,000 miles an hour. So love that. Question number 2 is, who's been the most influential person in your career to date? And that includes your rugby career.
Oh, wow. That's a really fantastic question, Rita. And by the way, I didn't listen. I knew you did a lightning round, and I didn't listen to. And
I don't give the questions out because I don't want to I want to have the awkward pause and let me think about that.
Sure. For rugby, I'm going to say Dr. Carter Croft, just your 100% true blue rugby guy that opened up so many doors for me in his life, and he didn't have to. Coming from England and just believing in me that there was something there that needed to come out. So for sure there. And then for business, that's a tough one, but I'm actually going to say Lisi Bishop, the founder of Lisi Bishop Real Estate. And, she's a powerhouse within Keller Williams International. And Lisi is just one of those anomalies in real estate and business where you just have to scratch your head and say, how in the world does she do that? But what she taught me about urgency, communication, doing what you can today, don't put it off tomorrow, and just the art of real estate in general. I mean, priceless. I mean, I legitimately got a PhD in residential real estate in such a short amount of time because she is such a hard-charging human being. I mean, for perspective, I mean, think a really great agent's going to do 50 listings a year. You know, she'd do 120 by herself. That's outside of the team, right? And so, I mean, just those sorts of things. What are those secrets that those next level people are doing? And so I'm always curious about that. And she was kind enough to give me that floor to mentor me.
Mate, that's incredible. And to have that from day one, it's when you got involved in the space. I think that's such an incredible way. And there's a little bit of woo-woo-ness around people you attract. So it's probably a little bit of a reflection on yourself. You're attracting the right people at the right time. So and having the ability to say yes at the right time, because I'm sure if you said no, you may not be in this position you are today.
You can't count out the woo, Reed. You can't.
You can't count out the woo. I've got to quote you on that. I love it. Question number 3 is, what's the most influential tool you use in your business? And when I say tool, it could be a physical tool like a journal or a phone, or it could be a piece of software that you just can't run the business without. What is it?
Teams.
Microsoft Teams. Yep.
Just because, one, you don't want to drown everybody in emails, and 2, being able to just pop in and, in and out of calls all day and seeing people's faces, in a, whatever we want to call it, a post-COVID world and a tech world, remote world, those are invaluable because you can be very efficient with communications, which is the bedrock of a successful business.
Right. Yeah, well, I completely love it. We use Zoom, but yeah, being able to quickly check in and out as in a remote situation is really, really important. So love it. Question number 4 is, in one sentence, what's been the biggest failure in your career? What did you learn from that failure?
Biggest failure of my career, not setting expectations ahead of time. So I think, some nuggets here for people listening that are in business or they're in multifamily. Maybe they're aspiring or currently involved in multifamily. If you do not set very clear expectations with your potential partners, you are setting yourself up for some rough roads. So always front loading communication so that you truly understand, hey, where are you at from a values level? And, let's talk nuts and bolts about the business. Let's talk numbers, et cetera. How's that going to play out? But also understanding, hey, what are your expectations of me and vice versa? And how do you see this playing out in the next year? What are your expectations there? What about 5 years? What about 10 years? All of those sorts of things, because you don't want to get into a really big relationship with somebody, especially when you're dealing with other people's money as well. And then things really go pear-shaped pretty quickly. That's just not fun. And so I would counsel people from my own experiences, making sure that you're taking the time to set those expectations and really map that out and put it on paper. Anybody that's going to match you from a professionalism standpoint, and they're going to appreciate that. And that's going to be the right fit for you as far as a partner.
Yeah, no, we're implementing just behind us is Traction, which I'm sure you probably have, the EOS system, and talk about rocks, and it's essentially setting up the expectations, and then through those rocks, you're measuring KPIs, key performance indicators, and then that helps people keep on track. And with a remote situation, which has been the underlying theme of this entire show today, it's like that helps people feel what they need to achieve. And you don't need to be looking over their shoulder every single day. You can be remote because you have set your expectations very clearly. If you hit that in the first quarter, second quarter, whatever it is, you're doing your work, and that's all we ask of you. So that's awesome stuff. Mate, last question. Where can people reach you to continue the conversation? That would be in your sphere. Where do they go?
Yeah, you can reach me on LinkedIn. I think you'll probably chuck that into the show notes, and you can come to remcapital.com and schedule a call there. Glad to hear from anybody that's wanting to speak more. And it can always be about rugby or real estate or just life in general. I don't mind connecting with people that way too.
That's awesome, my friend. Well, look, I want to thank you so much for jumping on the show today. I just want to reflect some of the things I took away. Look, massive rugby nerd and fanboy over here. So awesome stuff to meet an ex-professional rugby player. And thank you for opening up about all the the challenges of coming in and out of professional sport. I think it's a really big thing that people probably don't talk about. But you've clearly nailed the transition well, and having the right mindset around that, surrounding yourself with people who can help you, and you mentioned saying yes to many things and being grateful to those who have opened doors for you. It clearly sees that, as you said, you can't count out the woo-woo, but that has helped you in a way that is both through professional career in rugby, but also into the transition into commercial real estate, and then resi real estate, and then into commercial real estate, and now what you're doing today. So definitely something that there's there for people to take away, that you can't plan it all out, and I'm sure you probably didn't plan any of this out when you look back over your career, and being a little bit comfortable in the uncertainty. And I think that bodes well for you and has boded well, over the last 20 odd years. So did I leave anything out?
No, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, Tony Robbins quote, people's remuneration in life, what they get out of it, in business especially, is directly correlated to the amount of adversity that they can deal with.
Right.
So when you put yourself out there, it can be super uncomfortable, but, you've got to take some risk to get some reward, and, be a little bit bold sometimes.
That's exactly right. Well, look, mate, thank you again for jumping on the show. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll catch up very, very soon.
Thanks, Reed.
Well, there you have it, another cracking episode jam-packed with some incredible stuff from John. If you do want to check him out, please check him out on LinkedIn, or go to remcapital.com to see what he is doing over there and all the awesome deals he's buying across 7 different states here in the United States. I want to thank you all again for taking some time out of your day to tune in to continue to grow your financial IQ, because that's what we're all about here on this show. If you do like this show, the easiest way to give back is to give it a 5-star review on iTunes. And all the show notes from today's show will be up on my website at reedgoossens.com. And we're going to do this all again next week. So remember, be bold, be brave, and go give life a crack.